Okay, hi everybody. Welcome. It's so nice to see people here face to face. So thank you so much for making the big effort of coming out today. I wanted to welcome you, Balka Bibalka, which means welcome, welcome in the land of the Yugara people. My name is Suzanne Carrington and I'm a professor at QUT and the program director of the school years program for the Autism CRC. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the Autism Education Showcase and book launch today. The Queensland University of Technology acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. Today, we are here to celebrate the celebration of 6 years of research from Autism CRC's school years program into evidence-based and evidence-informed approaches and practices. Our program today features 2 panels and the launch and book sales of 2 sister books that together with our community learning online platform, Inclusion Ed, shares the findings of 6 probably 7 years actually now, of research in the school years program, Autism CRC. The first panel of autistic adults, Rachel Aberdeen and Trudy Bartlett, will share their experiences and discuss how autistic students can be better supported at school. Associate Professor Beth Sagas will discuss the findings from our first significant research project about the educational needs of students on the spectrum. Dr. Keely Harper will be linking to Inclusion Ed to highlight relevant models of practice. At 3 p.m, Andrew Davis, the Chief Executive Officer of the Autism CRC, will launch the 2 sister books and we will have a break for afternoon tea and book sales if you wish to purchase books. At 4 p.m, we have our second panel discussion with a range of education researchers talking about their research into supporting students on the spectrum in inclusive school settings, while Keely will showcase how Inclusion Ed supports inclusive practice. This event is a face-to-face event and also an online event. So I'd like to welcome Associate Professor Michael Whelan, who is here behind me. Here's Michael. And Michael is going to do the great job today of chairing the panel. So we really thank you for doing that for us today, Michael. Michael Whelan is an academic, musician and autism advocate. In addition to his interdisciplinary live arts practice, Michael has written and directed a range of short films on topics ranging from post-school transition for young people with autism to youth at risk and bullying. In addition to his memoir, The Other Country, Michael wrote the documentary film, What Are You Doing? This educational film for school audiences on the topic of social inclusion and autism was distributed to every school in Australia and was screened at the United Nations in New York as part of World Autism Day activities in April 2013. Associate Professor Whelan is based at QUT, where his research is focused upon post-school transition for young people with access and equity challenges, accessing higher education. And Michael is also one of our authors of the books that we're launching today. So thank you very much, Michael, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And welcome everybody to the session today. It's unusual having people in the room as well as online. So if we don't quite pitch our voices high enough so that you can hear them, please raise a hand in the room, or if you can't hear us online, please just make a comment or raise a hand there and they'll let us know. Please welcome onto the stage Trudy Bartlett, Rachel Aberdeen and Beth Sagas. Please come and have a seat. I'll have a seat as well so that we're all keeping with the rules. And I'm going to read a short bio on everybody present. I've told them that if their bios are any too boring, I'm going to make stuff up to spice them up a little bit. But Beth Sagas Originally trained as a primary and special education teacher, during her 30 years of teaching experience, she's worked across all educational age groups in a diverse range of educational contexts. A focus of her teaching has always been developing supportive educational environments for students on the autism spectrum. And for many years, she's worked across a range of educational contexts as an advisory teacher for ASD. Welcome, Beth. Trudy Bartlett is on the autism spectrum and is a high school teacher at Marsden State High School, a high school special education teacher, I beg your pardon, a graduate of the Sylvia Roger Academy Future Leaders program, and a co-author of one of the book chapters that we're launching today, titled Research Approaches to Supporting Students on the Autism Spectrum in Inclusive Schools. Trudy's a member of the Advisory Committee for Inclusion Ed and is an advocate for autistic students at her school. Trudy's also very sporty. She's a Queensland representative futsal player and coaches futsal for Queensland athletes with disabilities. She's also a super champion with a Rubik's Cube and has promised to teach me and get my time in under 8 minutes. 8 hours I'd be happy with. And finally, we have Rachel Aberdeen. Rachel is a researcher and musician on the autism spectrum living here in Brisbane. She works as a research assistant at Queensland University of Technology and has worked on various projects around autism and education. Rachel believes that autistic people can achieve great things if they're given the right tools and supports, and that the only way to know what the right tool and supports are is to listen to autistic people. Rachel's previous speaking engagements have included the 2018 Autism Education Conference in Brisbane and the 2019 Asia Pacific Autism Conference in Singapore. Rachel's also a musician. She plays something like 12 musical instruments. And in addition to that, also the bagpipes. I had to, I couldn't help it. So my first question today would be to Trudy. Trudy, what would you describe as your greatest challenge being in a school environment when you were a student initially, and then now as a teacher?
So the biggest challenge that I face is the sensory sensitivities. So things like unnatural lighting, so the fluorescence, and just the sound of just things inside the room, like people tapping, people riding the projector fans going, the noise of the classrooms next door. All of those sorts of things are the biggest thing that I find when I was a student, and now as an adult, I find that the challenge as well.
And when you were going through school, like, where did you go to school?
I went to Birron Girls High in Sydney and studied down there at university as well. And being in an all-girls school, they don't cope very well with hyperactive people. I also have ADHD, so sitting still is not something that I do very well. And I was constantly in trouble for moving about and trying to, and sensory seeking basically, just so that I could be within the classroom and be able to concentrate on the learning.
Yep. And how did that sensory overload impact on your learning as you were working your way through school?
It gave too much feedback, too much information coming in at once, and I wasn't able to filter out that extra noise or the light within the room. I often would wear a hat just as a barrier to stop some of that lighting and make it a bit easier for me to see as well, or like to concentrate as well.
Yep. And was the school able to adapt at all when you were going through?
No.
The environments or the circumstances you found yourself in?
Unfortunately, no. Back when I was in school, there wasn't much understanding about students with disabilities, particularly autistic students. I presented quite neurotypically. So my need to move around and, struggling with the sensory environment was seen as disruptive, and me being a challenging student and avoiding actually work, when what I was struggling with was the overload of the input coming in. Yeah.
And was that still much the same experience when you went through university to do your teacher training?
Yeah, a similar sort of thing, big rooms with lots of artificial lighting. I was able to wear a hat, so they're a bit more loose in that one. So that sort of helped for me in that situation. But yeah, I just think it's the unknowns. And I hate this way, but because I present or what people have been non-autistic, people don't believe when I say to them that the noise is too loud or the lights are too bright. So I had lots of challenges trying to advocate for myself, for my needs, which as an adult, I try and instill in my students, it's okay to ask for those supports. It's okay to say, hey, this is too loud, this is too bright.
And now that you're a teacher yourself, are you able to adapt your teaching environment to work better for you?
Oh, absolutely. Now I'm in charge of the classroom. I can choose whether I want to have all the lights on. You know, I actually teach with most of my lighting off. Obviously enough lighting within the room, and as much as possible have natural lighting. Again, the noise situation is I can hear classrooms next door. So what I do is I put music on, and I allow my students to have fidgets as well. And I walk around solving Rubik's Cubes in between teaching, and that's just seen as the norm now. Because I do it, then the students feel much more comfortable in being able to do it themselves.
And what about the neurotypical kids in the class? I'd imagine that their response is quite, they would respond quite positively to having changed environments. Is that true?
Yeah, they do. It's a lot of the strategies I use are universal design for learning. So whilst they are beneficial for autistic students or diverse learners, they're also beneficial for the greater population. And I find that the behaviour challenges become very minimal when everyone's sensory profile is being met at the time.
And I'd imagine you're the go-to person in the school from other teachers who come and ask your advice about particular students or particular classroom situations. What are the big things, the big advice requests that you get from teachers in the school?
I do have a number of teachers, they come to me and say, I have this particular student, how can I best support them? Often it's my advice is ask them. If you want to know what best supports an autistic student or an autistic person, you ask them, because they're the best person. They know what's going on. Autistic people, we're not all the same. We have very different autistic profiles, and the best way to meet the needs of each person is to ask them personally. I know often from the teacher side of it, we are directed to speak to parents, carers, teachers, but ultimately if you speak to the young person themselves, they'll come up with stuff that actually works, as opposed to stuff that is, or strategies that are pushed upon them by the neurotypical people that think this is what they need at the time.
And that open communication, just asking, is the key, isn't it?
Yeah. I find that even when I just ask the kids, they start to relax a little. It's like, oh, someone actually understands me. Someone's actually asking for my input, my feedback on what's going to work for me. Because again, what works for one autistic student doesn't necessarily work for another autistic student.
Now I'm going to ask Rachel a question next. So we might just do a quick sanitizing of the microphone. Okay, Rachel, I'm not going to ask you how many sharps in the key of, no, I'm not going to do it because I might get it wrong and you get it right. Now, in the book, you describe how you found transitioning to work environments more difficult than your journey at being at school. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of school, and then what happened when you tried to make the transition of work from, transition to work and employment?
Well, in school, I wasn't recognised as being autistic at all because I was compliant, I was academically bright, and when I was in school, the stereotype of autistic people was the child screaming in the corner. And when people noticed that something was different, it was put down to things like being anxious or lazy, or I'm sure any autistic women listening can relate to that. And so I wasn't given the tools that I needed to succeed. It was just assumed that because I could succeed in school, I could succeed anywhere. Yeah.
And so can I ask a bit more about school? Was it an enjoyable period for you? Or was there were you finding that just the experience of classrooms and the social environment of school, was that a challenge? How did you navigate all of that?
The social environment was quite challenging. I didn't particularly care if I was liked or not, but I was bullied and I did wish people would just leave me alone.
Yeah.
It improved after some of my friends taught me to look straight at people and just tell them to F off. And
I have no idea what that means. But don't explain it. Yeah, okay. And so, and did you, how, in terms of academically, did you require extra support during school? How did that go?
I didn't need any extra support, so I was generally in advanced classes. But towards the end, if I wasn't interested in a subject, I'd just disengage completely.
Yeah.
So my grades ranged from like A's to no work submitted.
Yeah, yeah. And so you've succeeded really well at school academically. You're out of that environment and then transitioning to work. Describe that process. What was that like?
I just had no idea what I was meant to do. Because as I mentioned in my chapter in the book, there was no structure, and I thrive on structure and having a plan. So I'd go to job interviews and they'd ask a question like, why do you want to work here? And I'd just be blank because obviously it's for the money. Do you think people are passionate about your call centre?
I hope you said that at least once.
I said it once at an interview for Coles and I got the job. Not the part about do you think people are passionate about Coles?
Yeah. And so what was it in the ritual of the job interview where the employer or the HR person is asking their set questions? What about that whole HR ritual do you think could change to be more supportive for neurodiverse applicants?
Not asking so many dumb questions for a start.
Yep, got that. Hold on, we'll just get that. Dumb questions.
And also giving questions in advance is very useful, just so that you've got time to prepare an answer. Because I find myself, it's hard being put on the spot. Like, as a highly trained musician, if someone asks me a question about what music I like on the spot, I'll be like, duh, I don't know, I'm tone deaf.
Do you think that, in what ways do you think recruiters need to change when working with and going through the recruitment process with neurodiverse applicants?
I think be more open and honest about what's actually required at the job. A lot of job descriptions are vague, like good people skills, good customer service skills. Give concrete examples of what good customer service skills are. Like, we want someone who's fast, who'll greet people when they come into the store, who knows the store inventory. That's much easier to work with than to give examples of how you can do the job.
Yeah, and you mentioned being on the spot, not quite knowing or having prepared a response. What was the reaction when you had that pause time, or that you were processing that and working through? What do you think that is going through the recruiter's mind at that time?
I think they're thinking, if this person can't even talk in a job interview, how are they going to talk to customers? Something like that.
Yeah.
Talking about stupid questions, I am a recruiter who did ask one of Rachel because she was a standout candidate for what we were looking for. But one of the questions that I had asked was, if you were finding the work that you were being asked to do challenging, how would you manage that? Like, what sort of things would you do? And she went to answer it, and then she just looked at me and she said, how difficult do you think this is going to be? And it was like, well, it's not, but I just wanted to check you're okay and you had some, some idea of how you're going to manage. So yeah,
She's never going to let me forget that. But it wasn't a stupid question, but the whole interview, it came across as a good workplace to work in. So I was like, have I missed something? Is this actually awful? But it wasn't.
So from the process that you've been through, your lived experience of the recruitment process and now being in employment, you've gathered some tools along the way and some strategies. Can you share or describe some of those strategies with our audience, and particularly how these strategies help support you in your transition to work?
Yep. So the first one is that I use technology a lot, and I've got my phone up here with some notes. I'm not just being rude and playing on my phone. So I use it for things like knowing what to do, like looking up what's good to do in a job interview, things like navigating to an interview location, and things like imposing structure on my day. So I might set some alarms to start job searching, remind me to send out application letters, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I also use the principle of when in Rome. So just watch people do what they do. This is mainly in a professional context rather than a social friendship context.
Mm-hmm.
I also do it in the workplace to see if I'm meeting workplace expectations, just see what my colleagues seem to see as okay and not okay.
Mm.
And I've also learned to advocate for myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an important thing to teach to autistic people, because we're vulnerable to being abused.
Yep.
And I think teaching too much compliance to someone who doesn't have the same social intuition, I guess, as neurotypical people
Mm-hmm.
is quite dangerous. So teaching people to stand up for themselves is important.
Yep. That's wonderful. Can you, just while we're on that topic, are you able to share an example where you've been in a situation where you've advocated for yourself in a workplace? Sorry to put you on the spot if I have. We can come back to that if you like.
Yeah, can we come back to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Because I've got a question now for Beth. I've saved the hard questions for you, Beth. So, so at the Autism CRC, you led the Autism Educational Needs Analysis, a nationwide survey of the educational needs of students on the spectrum aged 5 to 18 years. And I was wondering, what were the key priorities and themes that your research revealed?
One of the biggest findings of the needs analysis was how critical social emotional support is. It was the highest priority for all of the participants across parents, educators, professionals working with schools, as well as the students themselves. The other things that really came about were, particularly from the student perspective, a number of key areas that they highlighted were very important, including navigating the social elements of the school environment was one. The support, particularly for the executive function elements of a school environment, as well as emotional regulation, particularly around helping manage their anxiety and stress in particular situations, one being things like coping with teasing and bullying, the social elements, but also around just those elevated stress and anxiety levels as a result of being in such a socially fluid environment that's constantly changing. So as well as that, the other thing that students highlighted was needing support with coping that constant fluid nature of school. So all of those smaller transitions as well as those larger ones. support with handwriting. Handwriting was also one that came out quite highly. And then also the sensory elements would be another one. They were sort of, there was lots of things that could be categorized under all of those key themes, but they were the really critical things that were quite common results.
I wanted to take the opportunity too to congratulate you on the work in that project. It really was made an extraordinary contribution to the national conversation, and I know that so many other projects within the Autism CRC have been guided by some of the outcomes of that particular project. So congratulations on that. While we're on that, I might ask Keely. We've got Keely Harper Hill over on the side of the room here. Keely is, Dr. Keely Harper Hill is a research associate here at QUT, and she's also a co-lead investigator on the Inclusion Ed project, which you can now see up on the screen. And I might just ask Keely just to show us, for those people in the room and online who might like to have a look at the needs analysis project, where they can actually view that online. So it's just come up on screen now. Keely, are you able to use a microphone and just talk to
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. That's
Okay.
wonderful. So you're now listening to Keely, who's not on camera, talk about how to locate the project summary of the educational needs analysis on Inclusion Ed.
Okay, so I'm on the homepage of Inclusion Ed and I'm going to navigate all the way down to the bottom. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Inclusion Ed, we start off with a video here explaining how to use that, and that's hosted by Jeremy Kerr, who is also off camera, but sitting here with me today. Jeremy was the designer on the project. And then as we go down, we've got teaching practices, and then right at the bottom, and it's right at the bottom because that's where teachers wanted it to be, we have the core research projects, and you can see that the first one up here is the educational needs analysis. So underneath the project, we have the summary of the research aim, and you can see here that there's a great quote from one of the students who completed the survey, and he's saying, "I get into trouble all the time for things I can't control, talking too loud, getting too close, interrupting. I don't mean to do this stuff. My brain just does it. I hate my brain." And so going down, there's information that the 100 students who completed the survey, and it was a really long survey, we have the top 10 difficulties as rated by students. So let's have a look here. And you can see here, so that's the top one there, planning for assignments, working as a group. And the things that Beth mentioned before, handwriting was number 3 in terms of neatness and also in terms of being able to keep up. So it got mentioned quite a little bit. And when the classroom is very noisy. And I mentioned those two as well as the bullying or teasing, because they will come to the fore later in the second panel. We've got information on what students found helpful. And we also have this section here about strategies to meet the top 10 needs that have been identified by students. And these were actually strategies that were suggested by 80 specialist teachers across a number of sectors. And we then went through and identified those that were evidence supported, and on the basis of that included those. So it's been a good way for us to share expertise from other teachers, and you can see here that there are a whole number of those, and it keeps going. How's that, Michael?
That's terrific. That's really good. Beth, I was going to follow up with you with another question. The research project engaged with 4 key stakeholder groups: educators, specialists, parents, and students on the spectrum. How did the findings from the 4 groups align, or were they all, was there a diversity of outcomes in that? Did you find there were some areas where people disagreed, some places where they aligned, or was it a very, very diverse set of findings?
No, I think that was also something that was quite interesting to come out of the project, was just how closely aligned the different participant groups were in what they thought was important. Often when you're working within school communities, you can feel sometimes, I think, like people are on a different page, but I don't know that it's always that. It's just that people are communicating things differently, but the needs analysis really reinforced how every participant group, for example, felt that social emotional learning and support was critical to this particular group of students as one of the highest priorities in school. That there needed to be multidisciplinary support, there needed to be that collaboration and communication, and there was very strong alignment, whether you were a student, whether you were a parent, or you were a teacher or a professional, around some of the key findings in that project across Australia, which, you know, that was across everything from autism specific schools to state education schools across different states, as well as, you know, private schools as well. So it was really quite interesting how well aligned all the participant groups were in those findings.
I'm going to just whiz back to Rachel for a moment while Keely is still there at the desk. Supporting the transition to work, some work was done in the Autism CRC's research program, and I'm just going to ask Keely to talk us through students transitioning to work and any of the resources that were presented as part of Inclusion Ed. And if you've got, after Keely speaks to this, if you've got any comments or feedback on that, it'd be great to hear. So I'll hand you over to Keely.
Thanks, Michael. Am I on? Yep. Okay. So down underneath the practices, you will be able to see a range of practices that come under a project called My Way Employability. And these were, this was informed by a research project that came out of Curtin University in Western Australia, and it was led by Marina Ciccarelli. And that was called the Boost A project, and it fed into and developed with funding as well from the Telstra Foundation and the CRC into an independent website. And that website is all about supporting students on the spectrum and young adults with planning post-school transition into work. And I think that so as part of that, and Cheryl and Brendan from the CRC were closely involved in the development of that project and that website, there has also been the development of teacher resources to support students who are accessing the My Way Employability website. So I'm going to just show you a little bit here. We'll just click on the introduction. So this is one of our teaching practices, and it's just thinking. Okay, so underneath the practices, teachers can see where which students it's applicable to, whether or not there are resources, and this goes through, and you can see here, actually, we're doing an evaluation. So we've popped in an opportunity to recruit people there. But we go down and teachers are able to very quickly see whether or not the practice will help students and how it will help themselves. This is showing how the current project fits into the whole range of practices. But if I take you down here to plan, it's all the information and all the resources that teachers need to be able to implement this practice with their students. It gives some general ideas. It makes sure that there are links directly to the My Way Employability website. And on this series of practices, we've also differentiated the resources. So they have different levels of scaffolding. So you can see here, one hand has the least amount of scaffolding. So we use the idea that a hand is help. So this has the least amount of help for students, whereas a three-handed one has the greatest amount of scaffolding. One of the things that we have are resources for students to pre-learn vocabulary, which we know is incredibly important for students being able to access information in the classroom. And you can see here we have 3 different levels of activities around that, pre-learning the vocabulary. And we also have an example of supporting students to pre-learn vocabulary. And this is really just for teachers only, and you can see that there. So it's just to give teachers an idea about the sorts of questions that they can ask. We have downloadable lesson plans, and these are in 2 versions. We've got a PDF, and then we've also got an editable word-based one. And then continuing on, we have a range of different activities. And then because we know peer modelling is an evidence-informed approach for students on the spectrum, we also have some peer model videos of completing that activity, their career chart. We have notes for teachers, and there's also a note-taking PowerPoint if teachers choose to use that. But as you can see here, we advise everyone that it's actually very text dense, so it may not be appropriate for all students. And that is the plan. And then if we open up to the apply practice, we've got the lesson plan there that teachers can see instantly. So that, and we have 7 practices on here that are all about supporting students to think big, be creative, and to learn some of those soft skills that Rachel was alluding to. And there's some videos there that students can watch and analyse and reflect on.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot here, Rachel, but one of the elements that came through in that project was the importance of modelling and perhaps even role play as part of preparing for those interactions. Does that ring true with you?
It certainly does. And it's something I wish I'd had more of when I was younger. It's something I think technology is great for now, because say you want to know what will most people see as enthusiastic. You can just go on the internet and look up a video of it and be like, oh, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. And I've got a quick question here for all 3 of you, either as with your experience as students and also with your teacher hats on for those of you that are. One of the things in the Boost Day and then My Way Employability project was it affirms the importance of starting early in those conversations. And those projects recommended starting in those conversations and that engagement at year 9, beginning to open up the idea of where might this head, what strengths can we build on, what interests, what special interests might be able to capture your energy and enthusiasm and support it in a different way. Have any of you had those experiences with students as young as year 9? And have you got any anecdotes or interesting experiences in that area? This is a question without notice to anybody. I've just made that up.
Start while these guys have a think. But I think it also helps the kids to see the relevance of things, particularly with the curriculum like it is now. It's very hard sometimes for kids to understand the relevance of what they're doing or why they might be doing that and how that might inform what they do post-school. And certainly I don't think we start the conversations early enough and assess what sort of skills or support that students might need moving forward. So the earlier the planning, the better, definitely, in my experience. So
yeah. And in your experience, Rachel, as a teacher, does that ring true the comments of Rachel's, particularly the use of technology in modelling some of those transition activities? Do you find that you're using... Oh, no, the Rachel referred to on the use of technology and using that in modelling any sort of transition type activities? Sorry, Trudy. I was saying Rachel mentioned it. Sorry about that. It's my fault. I'm all over the shop. I was just saying that Rachel mentioned earlier the use of technology being really effective in modelling that sort of transition process. And I'm wondering, as a teacher, have you found that in your teaching?
Yeah, by having visuals and videos and doing role plays and role modeling, it certainly helps them to understand what is expected of them. Like Rachel was saying, you would be like looking for those social cues to be able to replicate them yourself. And if we could start that earlier on, I know in my school in particular, we're definitely in the mainstream side of things, starting around grade 9, grade 10 to look at what their post-schooling options are going to be, and they start choosing their electives geared towards those options of what they are going to do after school. So by having my way of employability, it's something that I'm going to take back to my school today and just say, hey, look, this thing is an awesome thing. I think we should start doing it with our students. Not just the kids that are about to graduate and go out in the big wide world, but certainly having that role modeling and having the resources there so that we can tailor things more specifically to the students as well.
Yeah. Trudy, I've got a follow-up question for you. One of the things that you noted in the notes that you sent me beforehand is that you're an advocate for the saying nothing about us without us. And I'm just wanting to ask, what does that mean to you and why is it so important?
So nothing about us without us is something that we autistics in the autistic community subscribe to. Basically, it means if you want to do something that is for us to benefit us, or you want engagement from the autistic community, then you need to have our involvement in it, whether it's being involved in organising committees or if it's looking at specific strategies for students. Like I said before, have a sit down, have a conversation with the students and say, I noticed that you might be struggling in sitting in your chair. What can we do to help you? Let them walk around the room, or you can give them some ideas of strategies you're thinking of. But if they have more ownership in it, they're more likely going to be compliant and use it, and they're more likely going to be able to then use that skill later in life. Like, I didn't advocate for myself at school and found it very, very challenging. And now as an adult, I try and encourage my students as much as possible by role modeling to them. Like I said, I walk around using fidgets in my class all the time, and let them know that it's okay to ask for these supports and strategies. And again, that role modeling is a big thing and something I'm passionate about. Trying to get as many of us on the same page. I've gotten a lot of the staff within my school to have a look at the Inclusion Ed website, and they've started using that, and they've found success not just for the autistic students, but for the other students in their class as well. So it's very good for that as well.
That's terrific. Rachel, I've got a quick question for you about the topic of and the importance of authenticity. In your chapter in the book, you describe the experience of applying for jobs, and I'm going to read something that you wrote. The seemingly unengaged, underconfident, uninterested body language that I exhibited prior to working on my job interview skills wasn't something I made the conscious choice to do. It was just how I acted automatically. In reality, I was often highly engaged in things. I didn't have a confidence problem, and if it was at a job interview, I was always interested in the job. Working on my body language allowed me to communicate to people in such a way that what they saw me as feeling was congruent with what I was actually feeling. It didn't mean I wasn't being my true self. It meant I was expressing my true self in a way that people would understand. And I wanted to say, do you think that people on the spectrum are often under pressure to suppress their authentic selves in order to comply with a neurotypical expectation?
I think yes. I think it's important to distinguish between what I did, which is I'm going to use these tools selectively in certain situations as something useful to get my goals, and what people often try and get autistic people to do, which is you must do this all the time, things that are unnatural for you, without relenting to even be seen as a person. There's a big difference there.
And how big is that challenge? How, you know, I imagine it's so different for every different person. Will make that challenge. Will address that challenge in different ways. How did you address it?
I'm just selective with what I do. Like, I won't pretend to be super bubbly and upbeat and extroverted all the time. But say when I was working in retail, I'd turn myself up a little bit, if that makes sense.
It sure does. I've seen people in retail and I want them to turn it down a little bit. So, but I'm sure you understand that as well. Yeah, please do.
I just thought I have something to add about the authenticity of the autistic traits and suppressing them. Often it takes a lot of energy, both physically and mentally, to try and appear normal or neurotypical like your peers. And that's where most of our energy is put into trying to be the norm, trying to present like everybody else, because then we don't stand out as different and odd. But what we need to do is start allowing them to embrace their autistic traits and use them. Like, they're often seen as deficits and like negative, whereas if you can harness it and lead it, like use their interests and their traits in a way to help their learning, you're going to find that they're going to be far more successful.
That's wonderful. Rachel, did you have something else you were going to add?
Adding to what Trudy said, I think there needs to be more understanding of how autistic people present and say what happy or excited looks like for us. As a sort of compromise, I'll just explain to people sometimes that what they see isn't what's going on. For example, if I'm somewhere noisy with my friend and I'm not looking at them when they talk because I'm looking at all the other distractions, I'll just straight up tell them it's okay, I'm listening. And I think neurotypical people need to make a bit more of an effort to understand us as well.
Because you're making all the effort currently, aren't you? You're explaining yourself, you're communicating your body language and having to explain all of your reactions to your neurotypical mates. And so that is it is a compromise, isn't it? People have to join somewhere in the middle, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah. We might at this point open up for some questions around the room. And I'm wondering if either, Cheryl, we have any questions online, or whether we have any questions for the panel around the room. Cheryl, yes, we have a question. And just in case anyone online didn't hear that, how much training do teachers actually get on autism?
I did my teaching degree something like 15 years ago, and I had one small unit on teaching students with disabilities, and it was mostly geared towards people with physical disabilities. And so then it didn't really set me up in the teaching environment to be able to understand a bit more about that space. These days, they do a lot more in the inclusion space, because it's something that is really pushed through region and through schools about the inclusion policy and you know, having them in mainstream classes, not being excluded anymore. Aside from what's happening at uni, it's mostly on the teachers to seek out professional development and commit to that professional development, to, you know, educate themselves a bit more and then come into that practice, taking it into the classroom.
That's great. Do we have any other questions around the room? Yes, we have a question up the back. We'll just wait until the microphone makes its way to you. And you might just have to pop your mask down to ask the question.
This is a question, I think, for Beth. Beth, in the My Way employability tool, I'm really interested in the uptake in Queensland schools. Do you have any sort of information around how well it's being?
I'm not linked to the My Way. Keely might be able to give you more of an idea, Carmel, on it.
Actually, Cheryl can have a quick response on that one. We might zoom the microphone back over there. You're on the run there, Suzanne. Thank you very much for that.
Cleaning as I go.
So the question being the uptake of My Way employability in Queensland schools.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the question without answering the direct question because I can't tell you the specific numbers about Queensland, but I can absolutely tell you that we've just ticked over 10,000 unique visitors on My Way employability website and 1,100 registered users across Australia and internationally. So
that's terrific. Do we have any other questions?
Sorry, Michael. Can I just let Carmen know that it's currently, we're still doing some, in terms of the Inclusion Ed, My Way employability educator resources, we're still looking and trialling those. And we have some co-design sessions planned for November with specialist transition coaches. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, we have a question down here at the front.
So essentially my question's around early childhood because I'll be upfront. I'm a pre-service teacher and we are seeing very little interaction around inclusive education. So I'm just wondering if there's any feedback on that, any resources that myself and my cohort can access. I'm also a parent of a child who identifies as being autistic, and proudly so. He's in year 8. But he and I had a discussion recently and he said, you know, Mum, it was never discussed. I wasn't ever embraced and finally I am, but that's only because I have peers that accept me as to who I am. So I'd like to know if there's any knowledge that can be given today.
I imagine that's a pre-service curriculum question that, Beth, have you got any insight onto that? Into how, what sort of curriculum and teaching there is for early childhood teachers about students on the spectrum?
Well, there's a requirement to look at inclusion, definitely, and one of the teaching standards is about understanding and knowing your students. So there is not a lot of autism specific stuff, though there is stuff on Inclusion Ed that would certainly help, like models of practice, for example. Keely, do you think? Yeah.
Yes, so we do on Inclusion Ed have coming the early years practices. So we have about 23 of those coming and they are 23 separate practices. On there at the moment, though, you might find things like the visual schedules to be really, really informative. And that was a project led by Jill here in the red jacket. So at the moment, there's that one just here in the front. Yeah, so that's certainly where I'd suggest that you start first off, and also work systems. So there are those two that are particularly easy to sort of develop up and down. And we do have those 23 practices that should be up and published.
I would think within the next 4 to 6 weeks they'll be up. Yep.
And we have a look. There's lots there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is my 3rd year teaching. I'm also a mother of an autistic child and we embrace our autism. We think it's awesome and frankly, why not? My son's primary school, so Toby's now in year 9. His primary school, he was diagnosed grade 1 4 days before he turned 6. And I walked in, I said, he's autistic, it's his birthday, bye, and ran away. By lunchtime, his teacher actually saw positive partnerships. It's all online. I did it as a parent because I wasn't a teacher back then. She did it as a teacher, and we've implemented it, and she's got it running now from prep all the way through to year 6. In her high school, it's also using a combination of this and positive partnerships, so it's more mature. And they've just done a session with all the local primary school, the early years like kindy, pre-prep, all the schools that feeds into his primary school are also using it as well. And because the parents can do it as well, we're speaking all the same language. I make my son own his autism and his education, so he speaks the same language as the teachers and me, and we're all on the same page. And that's why he's here, because it's his autism, it's his education, it's his future. It's no good me telling him what to do, because he'll won't listen to me anyway, because he's a boy and he's 14. So positive partnerships plus this, it balances everything.
Thank you for answering that. Sorry, I forgot about alcohol. But we are not receiving that as pre-service teachers. We're not getting that information. And I'm finding a lot of my peers are coming to me and saying, oh, what about this? How do I address this? And that's a space that we obviously needs to come out. So thank you. I will certainly feed that back, but that's just something all the educators of pre-service teachers do need to know, because we're an afterthought constantly. And yeah. Yeah, thank you.
And QUT also have a free online, just a little mini PD, but they also have a whole grad cert, which there's a fee involved with that, in autism and inclusive strategies as well, which you can use to feed in further down the track. You can get credit towards your master's. So there are a number of offerings starting to be developed here that are available. And the free online PD, there is an additional bit that you can do some assessment for, which also can help feed further down the track into either the grad cert or the masters as well. So there's a number of different offerings that are available.
Can I just? No, that's fine.
No. It's really probably important. It's important too to be aware that, you know, in disseminating information about different resources or things that are available, that it's important that we look at how do we access early childhood settings, and there is quite a diversity in early childhood settings, or what early childhood setting looks like. So that's something that's important for us to be considering. How can we get that information out and be aware that maybe they're not getting the information like perhaps other settings are. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Michael. So I was just going to also reassure you that it is one of our Autism CRC Commonwealth milestones to embed the research and knowledge that's come out of the school years program into teacher preparation, into programs across Australia. So we have just sort of started doing that work. For example, just last week, I presented about Inclusion Ed at the Australian Teacher Education Association conference, which was the national conference for teacher preparation. And in our next body of work over the next 18 months, it will be one of our top priorities is to work with folk all over Australia who are involved in teacher preparation to really share the knowledge and the resources that have been developed, you know, through the Autism CRC funded research. So, you know, we hear you. It's like being a teacher. The curriculum's always crowded, and it, you know what it's like in your program. It's always crowded, but we're very, you know, committed to ensuring that, you know, we do support not only pre-service teachers, but practicing teachers in having a better knowledge and skill and understanding of what's required for better teaching, to make teaching successful for young people on the spectrum. So thanks for raising it. We don't worry about being passionate about it, because we're passionate about it as well. Can I just add one more thing? Sorry, while I've got the microphone. I just wanted to add to your comment, Michael and Rachel, that you made about it is, it's not just the responsibility of the person on the spectrum to, adapt and make adjustments. And, we have learned so much from working closely with Rachel, for example, because she works closely with us here, all the time in our Autism CRC projects. And Rachel, I'm just going to remind you, I remember the first time we invited Rachel to come with us to one of the big Aspect education conferences, which was at the, the big International Convention Centre at the showgrounds. And Rachel was actually part of our team, and she was co-presenting with all of us, in terms of our researchers. And my whole work is all about being inclusive. So I was so focused on including Rachel in everything. And I remember there was the first morning tea break. Do you remember, Rachel? And you were sitting there, and Rachel was sitting by herself. And I was like, oh, Rachel, come and meet all these people, and, come and network and say hi and everything. And she just looked at me very, very assertively, but very nicely, and told me, no, I'm fine, thank you. I just want to sit by myself. I was like, okay, good. And so, it was a really important learning for me to know that that's okay, that everyone doesn't have to be run around and be social at every morning tea break. And so I think your point, Michael, and Rachel's, and I think everybody's point about it's a two-way process of learning and understanding is really powerful. And that's why it's been so amazing to have, these conversations today.
Thank you so much, Sue. We have a question online. If I could move over to Cheryl, and I'll wait till Suzanne gets there with the microphone.
Okay, so this is a question that's been asked quite a few times in different ways. And I think it's been directed at Rachel, but I think it's for everybody to comment. And that is, how would you invite people to take the first step in closing the chasm between misconceptions and understanding?
And you've got 30 seconds, go.
I think a good first step would be to, I guess, drop your assumptions about people. So, for example, don't assume that if someone's sitting by themselves that they're not a friendly person, or that they don't want to talk to you, or even that they're sad and lonely. So just ask. If you see someone sitting by themselves in this example, just ask, would you like to talk to us? Would you like to be our friend? So yeah, a good first step would be drop your assumptions and ask questions.
Mm-hmm. Trudy, did you have a response to that question?
I think the biggest thing is what people's assumptions of what autism is what they see in the media. So they think we're Rain Man, or they think that, we're highly intellectual and math geniuses and spend all our time on computers. But that's not the case. In reality, some of us are very creative, some of us are very sporty. So like Rachel was saying, we need to peel back that assumption of what your perception of what autism is, and maybe just take them on face value. And like Rachel said, just say, hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? Would you like to join us? And start that conversation that way. And they may not want to engage, like Suzanne was saying before, but just having the option to ask them, is there something I can do? I think that, try and break down that stereotype of what autism is.
Mm-hmm. Beth, did you want to add anything to that?
I just think if you're working in schools and consulting with the kids a number of times as an advisory teacher, going into schools and, you've got to help us, we've got this big issue, and you sit down and talk to the student involved and ask them. And in one case, a little boy who was throwing rocks onto a 4-lane highway, which was beside the school and causing havoc at lunchtime. And he's grade 2. And when I actually sat him down, he basically said it's too noisy and there's too many people. And when you looked at the way the playground was set up, they'd had a huge increase in numbers in their junior school. They'd plonked this playground between 2 old wooden buildings with the noise bouncing off both, and this tiny sand pit with prep year 1 and 2 in it. And he couldn't cope. So he was lashing out because of the difficulties. But it just took asking him and working with him to then manage a strategy. So, you know, I know we're busy, but often, as Trudy said, you just work with the kids as much as you possibly can. Yeah.
Keely has just put her hand up over there. I'll quickly cross to Keely.
I just wanted to ask Rachel and Trudy whether they think that teachers are so often in the role where they are supposed to know everything, and they're the ones that are in charge. And I wonder if you have any comments about that, because certainly teachers need to know that they don't always need to know. Do you, yeah or not?
Yeah, it is okay to not have all the answers. You know, with everything, we can't know. Like, I teach maths and science, and if someone comes to me and asking about English, I'm like, oh no, that's not my space. But hang on a sec, I'll go and find someone who can help you in that situation, or I'll do a little bit of research and find that out. And I know that was mentioned before, the curriculum's jam-packed with stuff, and you know, we're our expectations of what we need to do as teachers is constantly being, you know, more and more is being put on our plate. But if you don't know the answer, it's totally okay. Like, we're not fragile. You're not going to break us if you try one strategy and it doesn't work. Then there's a whole list of other strategies, and that's what's good about the Inclusion Ed website is there's a vast array of strategies on there that you can access and use. And I've done it myself. Like, a lot of the stuff that I do with my students, basically I've trialed and error on myself. You know, this works, that doesn't work. 99% of the time, I actually wear a hat because of the lighting is too much for me. And, you know, that's something that I worked out over time. And I remember wearing a hat all the time when I was a kid and not knowing why. As an adult, and the more I've learned about autism is, oh, that's why I wear the hat. And that has really helped me as well. So when I got my diagnosis, I just went in and wanted to find out everything I possibly could about what autism is and what can work for me. And like I said, trial and error, different strategies, and you'll find, you know, a few might not work or some may work, and if you find something that works for another student, you can always try it. And if it works, great, it works. If not, then move on to another one.
I think Trudy articulated everything I would have said very well. I agree with all of that.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. We've just hit our time limit. So Beth, thank you so much for joining the panel today and sharing your insight and expertise. Trudy, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your lived experience, and your experience both as a former student and now as a teacher. And Rachel, thank you for sharing your observations and insights and your lived experience as well. It's been wonderful to hear your stories and to be in conversation with you today. I'd like everyone online and in the room to give a huge round of applause or a not noisy clap for our wonderful guests today. And I believe Sue Carrington has some gifts.
Thank you, Michael. So because we're here to launch the books today, we thought it was a very appropriate present. Beth, probably, this is the first time you've seen the books because they have actually arrived. So Michael, Beth, myself and Keely are the lead authors on the books. So here are some books for you, Beth. Thank you very much for your time today on the panel. I'll just make sure I have the right card here. And here are some books for you, Rachel. Thank you very much today for your time today on the panel. And here are some books for you, Trudy. So also we want you to know that Rachel and Trudy are also authors in our books as well. So I'm sure that we've all really learned a lot from you sharing your insights today, and of course Beth's highlights of the very important research. And we encourage you, if you want to find out more, to have a look at these great books, which we're just about to launch. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. We did our silent clap earlier on, and sensory issues are something that we're going to talk about in the next panel at 4 p.m. today. So that's something we can look forward to. As far as proceedings go now, we're going to leave the stage and I'm going to hand it back to Sue Carrington. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thanks so much, Michael. So just before we break for our afternoon tea, which I know is set up outside for us, we wanted just to take a short bit of time with you to tell you about these very important books that have been written, I guess, by many people who've been involved over 7 years of working together in the school years program of the Autism CRC. So I'll just take you through just a little bit of an intro to what the books are all about. And then I'm going to pass over to Andrew Davis, who's going to do the official launch. So when we first started the Autism CRC School Years program, we were thinking, we actually had to do a pitch to the Commonwealth Government. And we were thinking about, well, where did we come from and where do we want to go? Because when we did the pitch, which was probably, 8 years ago, I think now, we were trying to think about what did we want to achieve, with this amazing commitment from the Australian government to support this research work. So we knew that, and some of this still happens, I guess now, but we knew that we had students who were socially isolated and who were vulnerable. We had evidence of poor academic outcomes, limited post-school opportunities for people on the spectrum. We had lots of evidence of absenteeism and suspension, lack of resources and training for educators, which we've still heard about today, and escalation of mental health issues. So what really drove us with this 6-7 years of research was we wanted all classrooms in Australia to have access to best practice, planned and coordinated transitions to benefit all children in the classroom. So the school years program was really focused on children from P to 12, and that was our focus. Our focus was always going to be on inclusive education. We know that the majority of students on the autism spectrum are enrolled in their mainstream school, and we wanted to be forward-looking and encouraging teachers in mainstream early childhood, primary and secondary classrooms to be able to support the diversity of students that they had in their classroom, including students on the autism spectrum. So we wanted all school staff to have an understanding of autism, and we wanted the whole school community to be autism friendly. So we've had projects over the years that are really focused on developing a whole school approach to supporting diversity, with a particular focus on autism. And we really wanted to work with our parents, teachers and allied health professionals and our students to collectively support successful outcomes for students on the spectrum. So the research in the school years program has been in schools. We've worked with over 300 schools across Australia. We've worked with teachers, people working in schools. We've worked with students and with parents. And we've really developed lots of evidence-based, evidence-informed models of practice that are now being shared on Inclusion Ed and are also shared in these two books. You're working? Thank you. So we just really wanted to acknowledge this important work of our education partners, because with a cooperative research centre, you work with organisations that are partners, and we couldn't have done it without our education partners. So we work with schools, education systems around Australia, lots of different organisations like Autism Queensland and Aspect that really provide a lot of support for the work that we do. We've worked with the autistic community in many ways, students and parents. I really wanted to acknowledge Andrew Davis, who will talk to you soon, who's the Chief Education Officer of the Autism CRC. I wanted to acknowledge Therese Conway, who's our Research Program Manager at the Autism CRC, who really coordinated a fantastic approach with a review team that reviewed every book chapter, as well as we all reviewed them independently as well. So we had a great lot of support, you know, from our colleagues in the Autism CRC. And we really wanted to acknowledge Julie Nickerson, who's there at the back. Give us a big wave, Julie, who we would never have these two books without Julie. She got us all going, coordinated everything, helped us manage the review process, and helped, you know, format, proof, all of our communication with our publishers. So these are the incredible array of authors that are involved in the book. So myself, Beth, who you've met, Keely, who you've met, and Michael, who you have met, are the lead authors. And then we have worked with all of these different people who are either researchers who work in all the different research projects, or different partners that we have had as part of the work that we've done in the school years program. I'm pressing, but I know you're pressing. Am I pressing? So we also just wanted to acknowledge in the book, there is amazing artwork. So the two front covers that you would have seen on the books, you can see here, front cover on the research approaches and front cover on the practical book, supporting students on the autism spectrum. And then we have artwork from our autistic colleagues and students all throughout the book in the different sections. And so that book, the artwork is actually, we've drawn on that from the art competition in the Autism CRC. So it's fantastic to have that artwork there. This just gives you a little bit of an overview of the two books. So we have this sort of sister book situation happening. So the first book is really about really focusing on the inclusive co-production approach that we have taken in doing the research. So we have worked very differently, I think, to what many researchers in the past have done. We've worked, you know, closely with our community and co-produced the research and worked in partnership in very respectful, inclusive ways. So we really wanted to write about that. We want to encourage other researchers to work in really respectful and inclusive ways. So this gives you an overview here of the 4 parts in the research book. And then in the accompanying practice book, we have the first part is about moving from a special education model to an inclusive education model, which is really challenging for many people in schools. We have a big focus on inclusion and school connectedness with a strong focus on a whole school approach. Part 3 is about enhancing teaching and the learning experience in the classroom with all of those practical ideas to support teachers to do this well, always with a focus on supporting diversity, including students on the spectrum, because our teachers told us right throughout the whole process of doing the research that what works for students on the autism spectrum often works for many students in their classroom. And so that's why Inclusion Ed is called Inclusion Ed. Part 4 is about transition to life after school that Keely has already shared with you. And part 5 is conclusion and propositions. So the books are going to be available for purchase. We've got the QUT bookshop people at the back who will be setting up to purchase books. And you will also be able to purchase them for people who are online. And we have a QR code to support that. So I'm going to pass over, before that, I'm going to pass over to you, Andrew. Yes. So before Andrew speaks, I'd just like to introduce Andrew. So Andrew Davis is our Chief Executive Officer of the Autism CRC. It's really great to have you here today, Andrew, and to give you've been, you know, such a great support of the school years program and of this event in particular. Andrew leads the Autism CRC's vision to see autistic people empowered to discover and use their diverse strengths and interests and he drives the whole of life approach in the Autism CRC, which is predicated on inclusive research practices and co-production to ensure the research provides practical and tangible outputs that benefit the community. So please join with me in welcoming Andrew Davis. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Sounds as though you can hear me, so this is working. Before I get underway, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, not just here at Kelvin Grove, but the people that are joining us online right across the country. And I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to send the thoughts of everybody here in this room to the almost 10 million Australians who are in lockdown at the moment, and thank them for what they're doing for their health and well-being, those of their loved ones and of all Australians. I'm very pleased to be here. As Suzanne and many people have pointed out, this is a culmination, not the only culmination, but a culmination of 7 years worth of work in the school years program. And very pleased to have the honour of officially launching the two excellent books here today. Before I begin, I'd like to pass on the apologies of Autism CRC Board Chair, Professor Robert van Barneveld, who can't be with us today, as he had hoped to be. I would also like to personally congratulate all the contributing authors, in particular the lead authors, Suzanne, Beth, Keely, and Michael, who's outside, for the extraordinary amount of work you have each put in to produce these two books that we're here to launch today. I also have to thank the team at Routledge for working closely with the authors, Julie, and the broader CRC team to publish the books and bring them to the community. You could say that the journey towards publishing these books began when Autism CRC was conceived and subsequently established in 2013 as the world's first national cooperative research effort focused on autism across the lifespan through a formal venture between the research, service provider, health and education professions, government, and autism community sectors, and supported by the Australian Government's Cooperative Research Centre program. A national program of research and its translation to practice, which is critical to what we do with research, spans the early childhood years, the school years, and adulthood. Autism CRC's school years program, which we're here to celebrate today, is built on our foundational research undertaken in Australia's first nationwide analysis of the educational needs of students on the autism spectrum, aged 5 to 18, as you heard Beth talk about earlier. This study identified priorities for research based on inputs from almost 1,500 school administrators, teachers, and specialist support staff, ancillary support staff, such as teacher aides, and critically, parents and students. It is an example of Autism CRC's commitment to inclusive research practices and co-production with those on the spectrum, their families, and those who strive to support them, from defining needs through to the conduct of research and to its translation to practice. And this is also evident in the subsequent and consequent research that underpins the chapters that you see here and you see in the practices on Inclusion Ed. Over the past 7 years, the school years program has directly involved more than 3,000 educators, 7,000 students, and 1,300 parents and caregivers, along with allied health and support personnel in research program design, development, and evaluation. It has seen more than 25 major research projects conducted on ground in more than 300 schools in the Catholic, state and independent systems right across Australia. It's a large task, and I know Suzanne always likes to quote that it's a challenge that you can't really comprehend. There was one project, I think, with over 30 different ethics applications to get it up and running. So for the researchers in the room, I'm sure you appreciate that's a major challenge. And those projects have developed tools and practices that enhance teaching and learning experience in the classrooms of excellence, evidence-based tools and programs for supporting social, emotional, and behavioural needs of children and adolescents, a better understanding of the developmental and behavioural trajectories of those on the autism spectrum, and also the skills and confidence of teachers and support personnel. Overseeing this vast array of projects and the diverse cast of researchers, organisations, schools, education departments, teachers, parents, carers, and students has been Professor Suzanne Carrington, the director of our school years program. Thank you greatly, Suzanne. As you have seen this afternoon, Suzanne and her team are dedicated to the principles of inclusive education and universal design for learning as an effective framework for providing the support to support the needs of all children in inclusive schools, not just those, but including those on the autism spectrum. A 2018 Bureau of Statistics study found that 31.2% of students with disabilities are placed in special classes in mainstream schools or in special schools. That figure for students on the autism spectrum is 40.8%. The data also revealed that 77.7% of autistic individuals attending school or another educational institution reported social, learning and communication difficulties at their place of learning. These findings reflect that the greater identification and presence of students on the autism spectrum in mainstream education has not been accompanied by adequate educational settings and supports in response to their needs. At the same time, international evidence shows that inclusive education benefits all students, those with and without disability. Herein lies our continuing challenge. I hope, therefore, that the learnings contained in these two books, gets the prop, will influence positive change in our education systems and schools through both practice and research as we strive for truly inclusive and equitable education for all. My thanks once again to the many researchers and team members and the authors who've contributed to these books for their tireless commitment to our work. I express my sincere thanks to the many thousands of students, parents, educators and allied health professionals who have contributed to the outcomes of our school years program. I know the authors join me in dedicating these volumes to the late Emeritus Professor Sylvia Roger AM, Autism CRC's founding CEO. Sylvia's contribution both nationally and internationally to autism practice and research was nothing short of outstanding. And her vision and passion continue to inspire us today. Sylvia was passionate about meeting the needs of young people, their families and educators in order that students are successful at school and beyond. As such, it is only fitting that we dedicate these books to Sylvia. Who's got the clicker? Got the clicker? One more? Thanks. Okay, without further ado, the time has come to officially launch research approaches to supporting students on the autism spectrum in inclusive schools and its companion volume, Supporting Students on the Autism Spectrum in Inclusive Schools, a practical guide to implementing evidence-based approaches. Please join me again in recognising the authors with a silent round of applause. And finally, it is now my absolute honour to present a copy of both books to Sylvia's husband, Dr. John Worthington, who joins us here today. I think we have to do the elbows, John. There you go. Thanks, John. Okay, so moving on, I think we've got another slide. It's up there, is it? Okay, all right, stay with us. That brings us to afternoon tea.
Please welcome our panel with a wonderful round of Auslan applause. To open the barrage of questions today, Sue, how did you envisage that the Autism CRC School Years program of research could help students, their families and school communities to focus on inclusion and move away from a special education approach?
Thanks, Michael. So I think when we all started as a big collaborative team of researchers, we were very aware that there was a lot of research around, I guess, education to support students on the autism spectrum, but much of that research was done in clinical settings and was often written and reported in journal articles that often people who are, working in schools or parents have a lot of difficulty accessing. So we're also aware that a lot of the research that had been produced didn't actually make its way into classrooms so that teachers could really access it and utilise it. And we didn't really know whether some of those really great ideas would work in inclusive classrooms. So our focus was very much right from the beginning, and often with a lot of guidance from Sylvia, as we talked about before, to really work with teachers in schools, with students, with parents, with the autistic community, to really work out together to find out, how things could be better and how things could really work well in an inclusive classroom environment. So, for example, if we look at using visual schedules and a lot of those really great ideas, resources that come out of the TEACH program, much of that research had been done in small special education type classrooms, and we didn't really know how to utilise that in an inclusive way, and how teachers could incorporate those good ideas, not just for the benefit of students on the spectrum, but also for students more broadly in their classroom. So that was really, I guess, our vision. And I still remember when we talked about it at our interview down in Canberra, and people didn't really believe that we could work with that many schools. But it shows you that education organisations and teachers and people who work to support students on the spectrum really wanted to work together to find out, how we could do this better. And so we really, did that. And I'm still actually surprised how well it worked, to be honest.
And do you, that appetite for engagement seems to have come through in all of the projects, that schools have been very keen to participate. Have there been any obstacles that you didn't expect in that process of engagement?
I mean, it's always challenging to get to recruit schools. And that was, Keely will remember that when she first started in her role as research associate, that was a big part of her work to, ring schools and invite them to be part of that research. So, it is always challenging to get schools to come on board and to convince teachers and schools that this, it would be a good collaborative partnership. The ethics, probably, as Andrew alluded to, was really challenging. Doing research and doing educational research with partners in schools is really challenging in Australia. In some places around the world, like the UK, for example, there's a centre that supports research to support education in supporting kids with autism. And all of the education authorities just honour the one university ethics application, whereas in Australia, we have to go to each organisation and sometimes, each school. So when Andrew said we have some projects that had something like 30 ethics applications, that was really challenging, and that continues to be challenging for us. So I remember working with some of our partners in the early days, and people were just wanting to get started. They just wanted to get started and do this work together with us in schools. And it took us probably a whole year to do ethics applications and to do all of the agreements and everything. And it took us a long time to get started. But once we got started, and we got quite good then at doing ethics, Beth in particular is very good at doing good ethics applications.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to ask the next question to Beth, so we might start sanitising her microphone in preparation. Wayne, that's your job. Beth, one of the many findings from the needs analysis was how critical it is to meet the social emotional learning needs of students on the autism spectrum. You co-led the school Connectedness research project, and I just wanted to ask, what is school connectedness and how can teachers create this for their students? And what do you say to school principals and teachers who value academic outcomes as opposed to perhaps getting a sense of what some of those social ones are?
Okay. So school connectedness is that sense of acceptedness, value, belonging, connection within a school community. School connectedness has been shown through research to be quite an important protective factor, particularly during adolescence, against mental health and well-being concerns for a whole range of different students. In the needs analysis, the school connectedness measure, when the students completed it, it was actually quite alarming how low their sense of connectedness to their school was. We also know there is a very long body of research that goes back decades that actually shows the importance of social emotional competence, social emotional learning, social emotional well-being as supportive of academic learning and academic outcomes. So for staff, there is a lot of pressure on schools for academic outputs, but that social emotional support and well-being is actually going to support those academic outcomes. One parent in the needs analysis said, "The fish stinks from the head down," and it always sticks in my mind as you've got to have a top-down and a bottom-up approach where you're supporting connections, not just for the students in your school, but for the whole community, for the teachers as well. Teacher well-being is very, very poor at the moment. So it's about connectedness across the board because the kids will pick up on that as well, and it's a good model that if teachers have good connections and the school community is well connected, then that's actually going to nurture connectedness within the student population as well.
What a wonderful project. And it seems that that's expands or it overflows so much more outside of the autism brief as well. It's a really holistic approach about relationships and respect and reciprocity. And do you find that there's any resistance to that sort of approach in a school?
No, I think it's hard because in this day and age where we're actually collecting data on school attendance rather than school connections, it's really hard for schools to, when they're under the pump, to be prioritising what sort of data they collect. But regardless of that, they recognise the importance of these sort of notions and trying to support them. Sometimes there's a level of frustration with trying to balance what they know is required of them and what they know is important to support in their student population. And it's about promoting resilience. It's about those relationships that you establish. So it's lifelong. And I think we often forget how school is just one very short period of time in anybody's life. And it's important that we are setting the foundations in those years. School's not the end date. That's just really the beginning. And that we need to be nurturing lifelong skills that build on lifelong success. And that sort of connectedness is going to really help that.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask Keely to now just maybe take us through the school connectedness project on the Inclusion Ed website. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Suzanne and Beth to pass their microphones up to Peter and Jill, who I'm going to chat to next.
Right. At the bottom of the homepage, I clicked on the school connectedness project under the core projects.
Just a bit louder if you could, please, Keely.
Okay.
Just in the room. Just to the people in the room.
Okay. Oh, that's better. Okay, so we have school connectedness here, which I got from the core research section. And I thought there's a lot of information here about the different elements of school connectedness and the benefits for teachers at student and school levels as well, and the main components. So that information in more detail that Beth has just spoken about can be found there. But also there's an associated practice about fostering school connectedness. And this is a really lovely practice. And I know that seems like an understatement, but it's a practice that really gets to the heart of what school connectedness is. And you can see here in terms of the WISE model that the team were using, it's about warmth, empathy, inclusion, strengths focused. So down here we have a practice video about teachers and support staff and why they're important. And then here we have under the plan, a lot of information about the WISE model, and importantly, how teachers can actually apply elements of the WISE practice. So I'm going to open this up, and you'll see here that there are links to an external website which was developed by the School Connectedness team, really to convey and describe, and I'll go in there and hopefully I'll get back again, all about school connectedness, how teachers, students and parents can work together to support school connectedness. So I recommend that you do go and look for that further.
My next question is to both Jill and Peter, and along with both of you, along with your PhD student, Anne Ozdoska, you conducted 3 research projects looking at the area of handwriting. Handwriting certainly dominated as one of the top 10 difficult tasks by students who participated in the needs analysis. And I might start by asking Jill, could you help explain why handwriting is so difficult for students on the autism spectrum?
Just to clarify, I think the project was addressing 2 areas of written expression. So one is the handwriting, and we know that students on the spectrum, their handwriting tends to be a lot less legible than other students. And in particular, they have difficulties with letter formation. And there's 2 factors that contribute to that, one being fine motor control and the other being we call visual motor integration, which is really a fancy word for just saying you can coordinate your eyes and your hands to do things like draw or copy shapes or to write. So that the handwriting is one aspect. The other aspect that we were addressing was the actual conceptual aspect of written expression, so the composition. So we had a strategy called self-regulated strategy development as part of, which really was a way of scaffolding the writing. Sorry.
Can you talk a bit louder?
Okay. Can you hear now? Yeah, sorry. So handwriting or writing difficulties cause a number of issues. Obviously, reduced ability to express yourself in writing, so to be able to say what you know. So that obviously affects academic performance. Secondly, handwriting issues themselves cause lots of frustration, classroom behavioural issues, and reduced self-esteem. And over time, children with handwriting difficulties have a reluctance to write, so they habitually write as little as possible. So it really impacts on their academic potential. So this CRC study, it was both about the self-regulated strategy development to get better and longer written compositions. It was also about overcoming the handwriting difficulties through using technology, which a lot of students on the spectrum are very comfortable with and prefer. So the app that was developed combined both the writing support, as in the technology, and the self-regulated strategy development to support as a scaffold for persuasive writing persuasive texts. So it combined the two, and both of those contributed to improved outcomes.
And I know that leads in a moment to a question for Peter about the app that you developed. I'm just wondering, to go back one step first, how much has typing using whatever device, how much has that influenced the challenge that kids on the spectrum have with some of the fine motor planning?
Well, the research would say that if you have difficulty with handwriting, you may also be a slow typist, but you're able to produce something legibly. And a lot of students on the spectrum, naturally, they tend to be quite perfectionist and they want to be able to produce something that looks nice. So being able to having to hand in some scribble as in handwriting doesn't go down well. They don't feel good about it. And so they stop wanting to write. And it was a bit surprising, I suppose, through this study. There's some schools that are right on it as far as using technology, and others that were still really persisting with the handwriting up till an older age, and that being made to handwrite is quite stressful for a lot of kids on the spectrum.
And at what age or school year level does that tend to change, that schools tend to lose the handwriting and move through to typing?
There's no hard and fast rules. Like one school we had, they had iPads in grade 2. Another school we worked in barely had access to the internet, and almost no technology. So it was that might have changed a bit since then. I'm not sure, but
patchy. Yeah. Thanks, Jill. Peter, the team completed a 3-year research project and 2 follow-up development projects, and these projects ultimately led to the development of the StepRight app. Can you tell us a little bit about the app before Keely gives us a bit of a look at it on screen?
Sure. So we started this project in 2014, so it's been a long time, and I do have to acknowledge Anne, our PhD student. She was so central to the early development of this app. And just speaking to some of the sort of philosophy that we took, and back to Suzanne's point, it was very much about understanding and talking to children, both children on the spectrum, children in schools, teachers of children in schools, understanding the context. And all the way through the design process, we were thinking about, what do we need to do to meet the needs of children? What do we need to do to fit into a classroom environment? What do we need to do to help with the task? And that was kind of the 3 bubbles that kind of formed where we were coming from. And we were very much involved in what we would consider a universal design for learning process, which means that we were thinking about children on the autism spectrum, but we acknowledge that many children struggle with writing and handwriting, and and as well as the conceptual sort of the blank page, what will I do now kind of freezing in the middle of an exam sort of thing. Naplan, thanks. But so we wanted something, because we know that, and the research tells us that when we start to use a specialised assistive technology in classrooms, it can make children feel different and single them out as being different, and that can also bring its own challenges. So we wanted something that could go into classrooms that could help a whole range of children in different ways. So that was our starting point. We really wanted to do that. And what we were focused on first is we went and had a look at other apps that 9 to 12-year-olds were engaged in and found fun, because we wanted something that was really connecting with children. When it came to the typing, we also wanted to think about, and there's great clever technology out there that you can just include with your iPad that helps with spelling and word completion. Everyone would be familiar with how Gmail is now finishing every sentence for me as I type. So it's not quite that, because we do need children to think about how they're going to construct sentences and spell, but it just gives you a bit of a boost and gives you that confidence. So we were very much thinking about those things. So we had focus groups with kids. We had interviews with teachers. We would do some design. We would go back to to children, we would go back to teachers, we would check the design, and this went through multiple processes. Then what we did is we did a 3-month study with 8 children on the autism spectrum. So we got them in, we did various activities, NAPLAN-like, to see how they were performing in terms of, we used NAPLAN markers because we wanted this to be authentic in terms of word count, how they were hitting those NAPLAN criteria. And so looked at sort of outcomes as we introduced different parts of the technology. And what we used with the strategy that Jill was talking about is we used a nice mnemonic, which is called Power Tree. So, you know, pick your topic, you do some brainstorming, and then the tree is the kind of constructing your paragraphs. You know, you've got your topic sentence. You need to create a reason, explain that reason, and then do a counter reason. And we would step the app steps children through that process and that scaffold, so you don't have that blank page effect. I know this is a really long answer because it was a really long project. Then we did that. We analysed the findings. We interviewed the students, we gave them a survey, we interviewed teachers. We then just, part of the idea was to let it loose for all children. So we had 200 children across 7 classes using the app, and that was a more sort of observational study. So we were just looking at how children were working. They were working in pairs, they were helping each other out. They were engaged in using the app. So that was really lovely to see. And it was at that point that we realised that we were missing some elements. And that's where we got to the second lot of funding from the CRC. We know kids love games. And so one thing that was missing, and kids told us about it, was, you know, those gamified elements. So where's the leaderboard? Where's my history? Where's my medal for doing this thing well? And so we introduced those kinds of aspects to it. And that also allowed us to do some teachers to do some analysis of where kids were. So we sort of allowed for user ID kind of approach, so you could really see where you were. We also created different modes, so you could do open writing as well, acknowledging that not all children want to do the same things. So we just took on board that feedback. And what we then wanted to see is, you know, we know that there are a lot of children in mainstream schools, children on the spectrum who are in mainstream schools, but we wanted to see, you know, we know that there are children at, for example, Autism Queensland schools that have different kinds of needs and different requirements. And we wanted to see how effective the app might be in that context. So we then worked with Jill in Autism Queensland schools and, you know, got the teachers involved. And that was a really lovely part of the project to see those children responding and feeling, you know, one of the wonderful findings is how children would say they felt more confident, they felt more effective as writers, and they were less reluctant around writing. So I think I've covered most of what we did. Have I missed anything?
No, that's pretty much it.
I think it's interesting you say the gamification of it and engagement. I did, having had a look through the program, the app, it has a wonderful Nintendo 8-bit look to it, a very retro game look to it, and that's very engaging and sweet.
Yes, and we did want to have that feel. You know, we didn't want it to necessarily feel like work.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really important part of the design philosophy.
It doesn't yell curriculum at you when you open it.
Not really.
No. I might ask at this point, Keely, we've got a draft version of the Inclusion Ed app for Step Right. And I might just ask Keely, just take through what we've got so far. Have you got your microphone on?
Now I have. So And just bearing in mind that the app has only just been released in the last month or so, is that correct, Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's had 3 name changes. I didn't go into that detail. And thank you to the team who have, you know, dealt with all of the intellectual property issues along the way. But
yeah. So so yes, we're in catch up. And again, as a practice, it starts with a summary and benefits, and we've got a link to the App Store so you can go straight down to it. We've also then got a short video, and ideally in the longer term, this would actually be a student using the
Okay, so
app,
we're
not
going
me.
to start in guided mode, and this just means that we've got a few prompts to help us organise our thinking. I've been given a topic of dogs are better pets than cats, and I'm going to start right now. So first of all, I have to write what I believe about the topic. So do I think dogs are better pets than cats? Okay, having said that.
So that's just an introduction, but underneath plan, we've got information for teachers. And I'm just going to draw your attention here to this video, because later I will take you to another practice just specifically about self-regulated strategy development. So this is a peer video again for teachers to either watch themselves or to share with their students. And then we have, again, the steps that teachers need that also include things like different ways that you can model using the app in an inclusive classroom, and similarly, how to scaffold students to choose a topic, because of course we have some students who are very happy to choose their own topic, but then we have other students who actually can't make a decision for themselves. So it's just some information there. And then if we go down to the apply the practice, what we have is a series of screenshots for teachers so that they can actually look and see and familiarise themselves with the different aspects of what the students will be doing. And it just takes them through how the app supports them to go through the elements that Jill and Peter have spoken about around the power tree. And you can see that the power tree slowly builds up down the bottom here. So that's just the draft practice, and it's linked to the Overcoming Written Difficulties practice research project. So I'm just going to take you down there because the app is for iPads, and it is coming at a cost of $2.99. But Jill and Peter were also very keen that the strategies of overcoming written difficulties, which were using self-regulated strategy development and also using technology to support handwriting, were made available for teachers with or without the app. And so we have here the different elements, and I'm going to go down here, and this is the self-regulated strategy development, which teachers can use to support persuasive writing without the need for the StepWrite app. So I just thought that was in line with what the team would want.
That's terrific. Thank you, Keely. And thank you, Jill and Peter, for your comments on that. I'm going to ask a question of Trevor now, who's online in Sydney. Thank you so much, Trevor, for hanging on. Before I ask you your question, Trevor, I'm going to ask one of the panelists to sterilise their microphone and hand it over to Wayne so that he can prepare. Right. We've lost him. Trevor. Okay. Wayne, grab that microphone.
Yes.
Why not? We need to get you a microphone for your question, I'm afraid. Let's just, oh, thank you, Peter.
Get my steps up for the day. This is clean. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just wondered if there was some advice around handwriting specifically, whether it's something worth persisting with in terms of that's actually beneficial for students who do struggle, to give them extra support in the actual physical act of handwriting, or is it more worthwhile abandoning quite young when it's evident that that's not going to be a successful strategy and flicking straight to the tech support?
Can you hear me? I don't think there's any hard and fast answer, but I tend to think if students are very frustrated by handwriting and that's putting them off writing, I think you really need to go to technology, and there's some fantastic technology out there. A lot of children's word processing type programs that are really make writing fun, and really it's about the outcome. It's about in the long run, I think. And I think if we think of most of us, we really use handwriting. I use it for birthday cards and shopping lists maybe, but we're really in a very technology world now. So I guess that's my bias. I guess I think that I don't like to see kids being put off writing by handwriting struggles.
I think from my observation, also looking at StepRight, one of the really wonderful things is that scaffolding of telling a story and the elements of a persuasive argument, because it will also build the confidence of a young person on the spectrum to share their stories, to, if it's not just handwriting, but also just in conversation. And because anecdote and story is such a big part of how we all socialise, building those foundations early of thinking, what's the beginning of my story, what's the middle of my story, and what's the end of my story, as opposed to entering a conversation with the technology plan of the International Space Station as your opening gambit, you know, and thinking maybe that's not going to get me involved or engaged in this conversation. So it's in a way, it's a foundation for those social skills as well, would you think?
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I think that was one of the things, and I think we got Keely involved with the speech pathology skills for that reason, because we looked at their ability to do a written persuasive text, but also orally. So that was one factor that we looked at.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I might now, we've got one more question. We've got Trevor. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you. I'm sitting right here. Yeah.
Excellent.
In Sydney.
In Sydney. Trevor, I'm not sure at what point we missed you in the conversation there, but I have a question for you. First of all, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks.
Trevor, your teams, both here in Queensland and in New South Wales, developed two models of practice, one for middle years and one for early years, and contributed a massive number of practices to Inclusion Ed, something like 45, I think. But before we look at those practices, can you explain to the listeners here today what a model of practice actually is?
Yeah, sure, Michael. A model of practice is really a set of whole class strategies that are both evidence-based. So they are strategies for teachers that have come from the research evidence, as well as part of the outcome of the MOP, Models of Practice Research Project. They're also what we call evidence-informed. And that means that the teachers in schools in the Models of Practice project, and it was separated into, as you mentioned, the early years Models of Practice and the middle years Models of Practice, they very much were part of the project that has resulted in the MOPs that are on the Inclusive Ed Hub. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And the translation of those two larger umbrellas into a suite of over 40 separate classroom practices. Could you tell us a little bit about, from those large projects, how that suite of practices was distilled and chosen?
Yeah, we used a particular research methodology. It's called design-based research, which is, I guess, you know, another term for it would be an action research project. So there were different cycles to it. And basically it's cycles of designing the particular project, or, you know, in this case, we were trialing a set of practices, and specifically for teachers to better support children with autism in their classrooms. So the first step in the design process and in the action project was what we called the initial design cycle. So we looked into the literature to find out, you know, what were the strategies for supporting children with autism in education settings. You know, where was the research evidence? So we identified a whole range of those practices, and then they were taken to the next part of the design cycle, which was a small team of autism experts that reviewed all of those practices or strategies from the literature to, you know, filter them to which were more applicable to a school setting, and in this case, mainstream school settings. The next part of it, the next part of the cycle was, that's what we call content. So that small group, you know, conferred that this was the right content, the right practices to take forward. And then, so I haven't finished, there's another step, was what we call the social validation cycle. And this was even before we actually trialled with all of the schools across 3 different states. I think there were 33 schools in total that were part of this project. And I'm pretty sure it would have been this project that had the 33 plus ethics applications. And I know Keely almost, you know, the same, supporting this project in ethics. Yeah, but and the next part was social validation. So all of those practices that were identified and conferred by the experts, we went out to teachers and schools across the country, you know, with surveys, one for the early years teachers, one for middle years, to kind of, they needed to rate and rank, you know, which ones of all those practices they either use or they thought would be constructive. So that was really the design of these projects. And then once the set of practices were finalised as part of that process, then we trained teachers across the school in those strategies, and those schools were metropolitan, regional and remote schools, just add a further layer of complexity to the project. And so teachers received training, and then, you know, after a period, you know, there was follow-up survey interviews to evaluate the success or otherwise of the MOPs in classrooms. And then from that was the final list or group of practices that you now see on the screen in front of you that Keely's strolling through on the Inclusive Ed site. So it was a pretty intensive, comprehensive project, but I think, you know, the great value of this project was done, you know, in collaboration and with the cooperation of teachers. And, you know, I think you mentioned before about, you know, challenges, or it's a question to Suzanne Carrington. You know, in the real school world, to undertake research is extremely challenging. However, this project, I think, with the way it was designed, and, you know, teachers were really assisting in what was going to come out as the, you know, the best strategies for Australian teachers, you know, was its great strength of that project.
Thank you, Trevor. It's one of the great strengths of the Autism CRC schools program too, the ongoing goodwill and partnership with teachers across government, cath ed and independent in all states, metro, regional and remote. It's been an extraordinary achievement in relationship building from all of the researchers involved and the project leaders. So, and this project is an enormous one. So the credit really goes to you, Trevor.
Yes, it was like keeping a train that had, had lost its brakes on the rails, to be honest. But it was, I think, the outcome, and I said it right through, as we were managing this project and its complexities, that it was the outcome, that resource that's now available to teachers across the country through Inclusion Ed. In fact, just for your interest, I had a conversation with the Aspect Director of Education, who is a Queenslander who joined us about 18 months ago, had one of the key roles in your Queensland Education Department. I said, I'm speaking today at this event, and I had a fresh look at the practices on inclusive ed, and I said, I was blown away having revisited after quite a long time. And I said to her, are you using this to induct all of your Aspect teachers as they join, the Aspect education program? And she, I know it's part of our approach now, we're including this, but she's gone away to think about that seriously, because I'm, pushing it from my end with our own school program as well. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Trevor. We're going to move on now to a question to Wayne. Wayne Wilson from the University of Queensland, Head of Audiology. And I'd like to chat to you about the Classroom Acoustics project. Beth has mentioned that students on the autism spectrum reported noise as one of their top 10 challenges. Can you talk about your project and how you translated the findings from your project for teachers in a usable resource on Inclusion Ed?
Sure can. I have to acknowledge that the original idea for the project was Jill's, coming from Jill's PhD work. And the project was about classroom acoustics, which is all about sound in the classroom. Something that's very important in any classroom, with students spending 60 to 70% of their time listening to teachers or listening to their classmates. In measuring sound in a classroom, there are many, many different ways of doing that. But it all really boils down to two things: the level of the signal and the level of the noise. The signal in a classroom is most typically the teacher's voice or fellow student voices. The noise in the classroom is everything else. Our project looked at both aspects, signal and noise, to see its effect on students in the classroom. We started looking first at the noise by going out into over 40 classrooms and doing all of those acoustic measures. And to perhaps nobody's surprise, over 90% of the classrooms we measured failed against Australian standards for noise levels in the classroom. Classrooms were too noisy and too reverberant. That sparked the first part of our translation work from the project that saw us develop a series of simple ways that teachers, using free apps that are relatively easy to use, for teachers to assess the acoustics of their own classrooms, to see if their own classrooms would pass or fail a measure of signal and noise. With most classrooms failing, the obvious follow-up to that was to equip teachers with simple ways to improve the signal and noise in the classroom, things they can do immediately to get their classrooms back into a soundscape that's going to work for their students. If that was the noise part of the study, the second part of the study looked at the signal. And that used a device called a sound field amplification device, not unlike the PA system we're using now. A sound field amplification device targets making the signal louder. It works by seeing the teacher wear a microphone and a transmitter that transmits the teacher's voice to a speaker or speakers and a receiver. And that speaker then projects the teacher's voice evenly across the classroom. And the effects of that are best seen by way of demonstration. Can you hear me better now? It's just straight up raising the level of the signal across the classroom. We went into many classrooms and put sound field amplification systems in for 1 of 2 semesters in a year. So the participating children in the study had a sound field system in their classroom for semester 1 or semester 2. We then analysed the students' abilities across a range of measures, both practical listening measures through teacher questionnaires and some video analysis work, and on a range of standardised measures, measures of listening, attention, memory, and educational performance. Putting all that together, what we found at the end of the year, where students had a sound field system for 1 of the 2 semesters, was all children in the study improved their listening when the sound field amplification was in use. The teachers reported the children could hear better and participated better in listening activities. And that was all children, both children on the spectrum and the other children in the study as well. A second aspect we found was for children on the spectrum, but not the other children, after the sound field amplification, they had improved in their phonemic processing, their ability to work with the individual bits of sound that go to make up words. And a possible explanation of that was they had benefited from the clearer signal, a semester of being better able to hear people speaking, the teacher in particular, had perhaps helped them to better process those individual parts of sound. What we didn't find, though, was any other benefits. There were no improvements in attention, no improvements in memory, no improvements in speech, reading, writing, spelling, or mathematical ability. What did we make of that finding? We suggested that might come back to what it is that sound field amplification actually does and what it does not. Sound field amplification raises the level of the signal, makes it easier to hear. But sound field amplification won't magically turn you into a multilinguist, a rocket scientist, a mathematician. What we also suggested was that there might be an effect of proximal and distant benefit, that the initial introduction of the sound field amplification saw proximate benefits, immediate benefits. The children listened more easily. The children on the spectrum started to improve their ability to play with speech sounds, benefits that we might expect more immediately from that immediate benefit of signal to noise ratio. The other benefits might be in the distant category. Your ability to improve your attention, your memory, your reading, your writing, your spelling might not be something we should expect quickly after only a semester of improved signal to noise ratio. That might be something that might benefit from prolonged periods, years of better signal to noise ratio. That sets us up with a realization of what we can and can't achieve and when we might achieve different benefits from sound field amplification. Improving the signal to noise ratio in the classroom might, at the end of the day, put the student in a better position to learn, but they still have to go on to learn. You can hear me better now, but you're not multilingual tomorrow. You're not a rocket scientist next week. But would you rather go on to learn to be multilingual through lessons where you can hear like this? So that guided us on what we might expect to see on the benefit of sound field amplification. we've translated that into pretty much that story, that what can you expect if you do choose to use sound threat amplification in the classroom. You could expect some immediate benefit for all students in their ability to listen. You could hope to see some benefits in phonemic processing, phonological processing for children on the spectrum, but go easy on what you might expect in the regards to memory, attention, and the longer term potential more distant benefits that we might get from sound field amplification.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Wayne. I noticed that there's a timbre and a pace to your delivery that's particularly engaging as well. And I wonder whether that's a practiced art of yours, but you speak beautifully. And we're not going to have the time at the moment to go through your contribution to the inclusion ed practices, but there are a number of practices developed by Wayne and the team on inclusion ed that list all of the ways of actually auditing your spaces, and then the actions that you can take in those spaces to remediate to a certain extent. And they're really, really well-developed resources, with Wayne speaking on video, taking us through those. Keely, there was a quick thing from you.
Just wanted to very quickly, because Trevor didn't get an opportunity to go through any of the practices under models of practice, but I just wanted to highlight for everybody, if we find the models of practice project down here, and you'll remember that I talked about an extra 23 practices. Well, these are the current practices that are associated with models of practice project, and there are another 23 coming shortly. So just to really highlight those, because Trevor didn't get the opportunity. So thanks, Trevor.
We have time for one or two really quick questions before we lose our webinar link. Are there any? Yes, we have one here.
Hi, thank you. This inclusion ed is a wonderful showcase of brilliant practices and provides teachers and schools with scaffolding to implement them. My question is about the culture of inclusion in schools. What tends to happen in my lived experience as a consultant working across many schools is you'll get pockets of good practice. So you'll get early adopters, you'll get resistors with some of this. So what's inclusion ed doing around building that shared responsibility model of inclusion as a shared practice across schools? It's a big question. Because all these resources are amazing. And in my work, trying to get this information not only into schools, so I do it through networking, etc., but then to get it as a shared practice in schools. So that's my curiosity or my wondering.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Do you want me to just...
Would you mind speaking to that a little?
Yeah, a little. It's a big question, isn't it? Mm. So I guess, I mean, inclusive culture is my baby and was my doctoral sort of research. So it is something that I'm very interested in. I guess that is something that we've worked really hard on with our partners. As you've heard, all the work that we do in the schools, in all the different organisations, with our research partners in universities across Australia, is really something I think that we're all really aware of, and we're all, trying to progress that issue that you have talked about. I mean, the schools who, most likely put their hand up to be part of our research are schools often that have students on the spectrum that really need some support and need some help. And I think, some of those schools have really benefited enormously from the work that we've done and the research teams and the sort of cooperative processes that we've engaged in. But, it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it, as you said? And I'm sure it's great to see there's people here, pre-service teachers here, there's people from schools, from different organisations here. You are the converted. We need to be speaking to the people who aren't here. And so that's our challenge. But we'll continue to do that work, and really happy if anyone has some other good ideas to contact us. And Cheryl's telling me to wind up.
Yep. Look, we're going to have to finish there. The clock has beaten us. I'd like to thank all of the members of the panel for their preparation and contributions today. That's been wonderful. Thank you all for attending in person today. And thank you, Trevor in Sydney, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us online today. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I think with that, we should draw proceedings to a close and say thank you very much. Thanks so much, everyone.
And just as we're winding up, and I know Keely can present the books in a minute, but I just really wanted to give special thanks to all of the people that have been involved in pulling today together. As you can imagine, you know, we were masks on, masks off, masks on, masks off, you know, COVID catering, whatever. So special thanks to Keely, Harper Hill, who has driven the whole sort of process and have worked just completely with our wonderful Autism CRC team who are here. So in special thanks to Cheryl, who's here, Cheryl Mangan, Callie, who's actually supposed to be skiing in Victoria, who couldn't go today, Sally Vidler, Brendan James, who's over there in the corner, who's been driving all of our technology and is behind a lot of the tech work in Inclusion Ed. Just fantastic team. We all meet together every week. So everyone's worked really closely together with the to get the event up. I wanted to thank you, Liv, who's been here to help coordinate our chill space and be a great support person. Obviously, Andrew Davis, who's here, who was always, you know, flying the flag for the school year's program, to you, Michael, to all the panel teams, and especially to Siobhan Bingham, who isn't here, who's the person in the background who has helped us get the event up. And also thank you to you, Nigel, for being here to take all of our photographs. I hope I haven't missed anyone out, but that's good. And Keely, would you like to present those? Because you've got them. Oh, okay. So we've just also got some books. Yeah. So Wayne, for you, thank you very much. Who's that one for? Jill, for you and for your Autism Queensland team. Peter, we've given you the research book because we know how interested you are in progressing inclusive research. And who's that one for? Oh, and Trevor, if you're still online, we have one for you that we're going to post to you. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And yeah, we're really interested to continue to work with you. I think I've done everything.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Sue. Thank you.